and they gave us some ideas, and then we thought, okay, is this then the best compromise? But then, since it was big enough change from last time, we figured it would need another approval of the congregation to be in good spirit with that. So that was just my brief introduction. Joel can speak even more to this, but I did want to open us in prayer because I think it's worthwhile. So, Heavenly Father, thank you, and may your name be glorified. We are grateful for all that you've done for us in Jesus Christ. We are thankful for the generosity of the stewards and the servants of your people here at St. Andrews over the years. They found this property looking ahead when it was surrounded by rice fields and sheep farms and no clear way to get to it. They built so that they could worship you here. It's now become at the heart of this city, and we believe that for many years to come, it can be a place where your grace, your mercy, your hope, your truth, your love is proclaimed to those who already know you, to those who do not yet know you. And so help us, Lord, to continue to offer a place that honors your name, that brings people together from various backgrounds and ways of connecting with you, and that draw us all to your immeasurable grace, which is found in Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Thank you. So the first version that we voted on in the winter time was really a response to a single question, which is, how can we get people to communion without forcing them to navigate stairs and ramps, as a way of being more open and accessible to whoever walks in our doors? And so what you may remember from then is that basically we proposed to pull the communion rail to the edge and slightly modify the platform so that we can kneel basically at this first step. In the meeting where we approved that plan, some questions were asked about what are we doing in this space to bring us more in line with kind of our master plan goals for how we use this space. And in addition, this seems to do something for the first service, but is there something that we can do for the second service to enhance their experience as well? Because they don't use the chancel area in the same way during communion, if any of you have attended that service. So we wrestled with that a lot because that obviously added many more factors into the equation, not just how do you keep people from having to navigate so many stairs or ramps, but how do you also make the contemporary worship better? And what we found in the past, when we make the contemporary worship better, we end up making the traditional worship better too. I mean, this is the prime example, right? We didn't know that traditional worship would ever want or need to use these projectors. We put them in for the contemporary worship, and now we use them every Sunday, and I think they really enhance, the flow of service. So this is a similar thing. Like, what can we do to push our worship experience forward? As we're streaming and live streaming, one thing that was recognized is we need to maintain good sight lines, which the cameras have been awesome dialing them in to make sure that that's happening. But our stage area is only set up for the altar and reading and preaching right now. But we know that our worship uses a lot of special music. Both services use special music, but obviously the contemporary service uses more. And then if we're going to address anything up here, we also wanted to look at maximizing the use of this space. These side areas are very underused. So I think what you're seeing then on the screen is how we're proposing to expand the raised portion to improve sightlines and allow for more special activity that has a better sightline from the audience. But while doing so, we wanted to make sure that we don't sacrifice the sanctity of our altar. And then finally, we want to keep communion service where people don't have to be navigating barriers like steps and ramps. So again, we just have this on a loop so that we don't have to camp someone back there and point to any particular slide as we're going through. But as you can see then, as we come around here, and we'll get to the kind of the overhead view, we're basically proposing to bring the main stage down one level so it's easier to get up to it. And it would essentially sweep out at an angle back towards that window and sweep out at an angle back towards that window. The communion rail would come forward and there'd be a kneeler in front, with that sweep allowing us to maintain focus towards the altar and the cross. And then at the same time, now you can see we've proposed to move the altar back and raise it up so that it's not at that same plane as every other activity that's going on. It has its own special, more sanctified spot.
With that, I have a question.
Absolutely.
Okay, you're moving the altar back and up.
Mm-hmm.
So there are still steps
Yes.
to be taken with trays, with young ones,
Yes.
dealing with those trays, wandering up and down and serving.
So we see that communion service and accessing what's on the altar would happen more like it does. So the question was, people are still having to navigate steps, especially during communion service, young people, acolytes. We see that it would happen more like it does at the second service, where one attendant is really supplying the other attendants, so that when they need something, one person can go up and get it. So it's a little less chaotic.
Going along with that, the altar gets very busy. The altar becomes a very busy place. Are you going to extend the altar on either side to make it more room for people serving the congregants to work? In your diagram, it really looks like a small little altar, and yet looking at how the congregants are lining up at the rail, that's fairly extensive by comparison.
So first, we are not proposing to change any of our liturgical furniture. It's the same altar. I think that besides the worship leader being at the altar, communion attendants accessing trays or putting trays back, which is not extremely frequent during the course of communion service. It's when it runs out, right? And then pastor receiving and placing offering. I'm not sure what other activity that you're seeing going on at the altar that is not allowed for here, if you could elaborate.
Well, just getting the trays out and getting available for use. There's a lot of activity going on right now as we see it behind the scenes. For second service, all your activity is in the front. Mm-hmm. But by the second service, first service, used equipment is off the altar.
Mm-hmm.
Patricia, are you referring more to just the altar guild doing the work there? Is that what or are you talking about
during the actual worship? Because you've got young ones with their gowns that may be too long for them, kind of tripping.
I would say that most people who are serving during communion do not have to get to the altar. And because what he had talked about in a moment ago was, there is typically like the second service, one person is the one who kind of goes back and forth. So we would probably have something like that you don't necessarily have 6 people, going up and down to the altar and back, that there's still then kind of one person who's kind of leading and directing and guiding it. So, and we have the time and, in between the tables and everything to make that happen. Yeah. Okay.
This is because I'm thinking forward, and hopefully this church was designed for, if we really grew, that a wing would go out that way, a wing would go out that way, and the church would resemble a cross. And so I'm trying to visualize, and I know you said it, Joel, it sweeps around to like that point on this side of the,
Essentially,
Fire.
the back end of the window.
okay.
So in
It
that
wouldn't be-
plan,
you would actually have better visual of the whole altar area from a wing if we ever
absolutely.
extend
Yeah,
it.
because thanks for bringing that up. The plan, yeah, does basically from that pillar, the edge of window to the edge of the back window
Right.
is the available space to push out.
Yeah.
So if we added a wing on either side, yes, this does. We would those wings, if they held pews instead of other, if a chancel area or whatever, those pews I'm sure would be kind of focused towards the altar, right? And essentially the same angle as we're putting in, yeah. So I think it does work very well with that expansion if it should happen. I think our current master plan, while we understand we have those options, our current master plan pushes us through that way first. Just something to consider.
Or a second level balcony.
Yeah, sure. Uh-huh. Yeah, okay. The equipment staging area is by square feet equal to or potentially greater than, depending on how far forward they come, greater than what's now, because we've eliminated that back ramp entirely. So band has entirely from the back wall to the edge of the stage. Special music, for instance, like we have the piano set up today, that kind of angle allows the piano to stage on the ground level, so we don't have to push it up if we wanted it to be part of that staged area. In addition, we're proposing to hardwire more of our equipment as possible, determining that with the help of Ron, to make sure that we can, since we have this underfloor space that we'll be creating, clean up as much as possible the band area.
So I have a couple of questions and at least one comment. So my questions are, could you kind of show us, because it's clear that the altar and the baptismal font from the picture get moved in, it looks like to me. So if you could sort of walk off, how does would the altar rail come out farther this way towards the pews, and kind of what that would look like? As somebody who participates in music, I know that you're calling it a stage. It's not a stage. It's an altar. And it's important that we understand that this really is about, and I know it does, that it's about worship and not a performance, because we are worshipers, not audience. So when I think about the band and the fact that I know that, and I've expressed this to Ron, please don't put my face on the live streaming, because it's not a performance. It's not a TV show every week. I'm a little concerned about, I don't want to be at contemporary service when people are up at the rail after communion. I don't feel like I'm interfering with them when I'm in band singing. I want to make sure that I'm not in somebody's face when they're praying at communion. So if you could kind of show us a little bit what that would look like.
So the rail essentially starts in the same spot.
As where the step is currently, or is it coming out further? Oh, or the rail stays where it is?
No, the rail
Comes out, okay.
and then continues along and swings back towards stand.
Probably about right here's where the rail is ending.
Okay.
And so we have, essentially from there to the wall and to the back wall.
Valerie asked my question because I'm not very good at visualizing, but where you're standing, does that step stay? Is that where we will be kneeling?
Yes.
And then the step above you is where the railing will be?
There will be no step above me, right? The main bulk of the raised portion is only at where I'm at now, one step up. The altar is not just up here, it's up another step and back. So that there's a lot of relief in front of it for the pulpit, which moves over to be a bit more central to the space. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, the altar's on a third step, whereas most of the front just altar areas on one step. Deborah, and then you, Dave.
As a member of the FIT First Impression team, as part of our training, we were taught in the event of an emergency that the congregation, I'm talking about an active shooter emergency, that the congregation would be directed to the exit doors in the front on either side. And I brought this up to a couple different people on the committee or the council or whatever you call this thing. But I'm concerned about egress in the event of an emergency because, first of all, the platform appears to interfere with the left side egress through that single door. And the other issue that I had concerned was a single door in the first place, because a double door is much more efficient in moving groups of people out in an emergency situation than a single door. A single door is basically a trap. So those are my concerns, that we are raising a platform that would interfere with egress on the left side and only allowing a very narrow hallway there. And others would be that I think a double door on either side of the sanctuary should be considered as part of the emergency egress plan.
Thank you. So I can't speak necessarily to how to plan for an active shooter event compared to how the building code handles an egress event, a fire or what have you. Yeah. From a building code perspective, the proposed plan does not reduce our access to egress. The aisle that goes to that door is wide enough to meet the demand, and this door, of course, remains essentially as unimpeded as it is now. The doors themselves, from a code perspective, they essentially handle up to 162 people in an egress event, according to the code. So, I mean, and again, we're not. Well, and to that point, I would also, wonder, single file through that door, is that slower than 5 people through a single door? I don't want us to, I'm saying that bringing over a path that is an appropriate size for a person to pass through, a door which is really designed for one person to pass through at a time, keeping it wide as it is now, you're still getting one person through that door at a time, right?
I think double doors should be part of the plan up on the left side, and I would hate to see us put a platform that would hinder wheelchairs, walkers, people with disabilities trying to get out that door.
Okay.
I know in event of an active shooter, we would probably all just be moved down. But I think that we should not construct something that could, down the way, need to be deconstructed because we have sought the input from the Stockton Police Department, which they will come and give you input on how you can improve the egress of your building. And I think that we shouldn't build something that then may have to be turned around and torn out to improve the egress. And I think the active shooter situation is maybe not as big of an issue among our second service, but certainly among this older service, we are concerned about it.
So, I mean,
Hold on. I'll let you say what you want to say there.
I don't know how far the altar's supposed to extend, but I'm wondering if where the handbell table now, if it's kind of comparable to what the expected space would be. So we would have a pretty good idea of what that would look like.
In both cases, that's probably about the space that you have. You know, I mean, they're both to code, but they're not necessarily.
I just wasn't certain for Deborah's illustration if that would give us a fairly accurate idea of what that would look like.
yes, it may come towards the end, it may be a little closer to the door about where the pillar is than where the table is now. But where the table ends now, there'll certainly be much more space than is currently there to funnel towards that door. I think it's definitely appropriate to look at how we can, make sure we have sufficient egress from this space, and that safety and resiliency is a value that we've been building into our master planning, that resulted in this project and moving forward. I'm not sure that we're going to address modifying the structure as part of this project, but that concern is definitely heard.
In the training, so we've had a group of people I've had brought together a couple times to talk about what about that awful situation, right? And honestly, an active shooter situation, I don't know if there's a plan that fixes it. There really isn't. I mean, unless you have armed guards standing at the door at every worship service, there's nothing that can truly fix that. Most of the time in the training that we've received and the things that we've looked at, we're in the process of trying to bring someone out to consult on the actual place, but we've already done some of that in the sense of just, cleaning landscaping, making, sight lines better, keeping people from being able to hide. Most of the plans talk about stopping it before, finding being able to identify there's someone in the parking lot. And so that's either through cameras, that's either through people out there. The other plan that we've been talking about, kind of doing those kind of artistic fences, gateways that end up funneling people, that would probably help at least focus our attention on a few spots and be able to, create some from stop points. But once someone gets in here, it's not good, period. Even if we have people who are trained to stop that kind of threat, which people in our congregation no doubt have very differing views on as well. What, you mean some people might have guns in here? What, huh? But that's about the only thing that stops a shooter. But I've even had law enforcement in our congregation tell me, you don't want to shoot out in church. That's the worst thing that could possibly happen. And I, well, or maybe it's the second worst. I mean, just, in the sense of, what is actually worse, having that shootout or not having it? So once someone's in here, it's it's the worst case scenario, and it is. But what we've been trying to do and what we've been thinking about and what we've been trying to, think, security team, what would they do? We would probably have someone on watching video, cameras, live feeds. Is someone approaching? Can you give people a warning? Because if you can give people a 30 to 45-second warning, that's about the only thing that's going to help. And I have, Deborah, you're, certainly sounds like 2 doors on each side, twice as many people through, but if that were to occur, I don't know of anything we can do to this building other than, lock down, be here at 8:15 or you're out, sort of a thing, or someone, checks you in at the door. I don't know what can truly help that worst case scenario. And again, most of the things that we've seen is watch, be out there, be a presence, know what's happening, know what's coming, because that gives you just enough time to maybe save some people. But obviously, yeah, once someone's in, it's ugly and it's awful. Right. Yep. Yep. It is.
So I think. Yes, but it does, since it sweeps back, there is more space funneling towards that door. Right. Right. Essentially, the hallway would be. So the sweep would essentially end here. So from here to there, we've got more space than we have now. And yes, for this last feet from here to here, it would be somewhat reduced. I would. Well, the door is not at the very back of that. If that helps your sense of. And then just to follow up, if we choose to add more doors, more egress access to this space, I think we should look hard at adding it on the back wings so that there's more options and more exits that would need to be covered if someone were trying to block exits, or if there was something going on, there'd be always more options rather than just a bigger option to get out.
I wasn't even thinking of this, which is weird because I taught school for 32 years, and that's all we did was practice lockdowns. But how easy is it to lock down? How easy is it to lock those doors and those outer doors if we see there is a threat through cameras or whatever? To me, it's logical to make that as quick as possible.
Using keys takes too long, but we could probably get a couple things that you just slip, over the two parts, and then it keeps them from being open. And that would be the quickest way to do that. Yeah, and a secure, quote unquote safety team member, would necessarily have those next to them. They thought, oh my goodness, I think we should stop somebody from coming in. They could do that pretty quick. Yeah.
That would be the least expensive, at least it's a step forward to creating some security.
Joel,
Do we have those things?
No, not yet.
Okay.
Joel, you might, in just looking at the overhead, you might want to just consider taking out that angle and making the angle on the side, so that it passes where the door is. It'll create more space on the ground level. If you're talking about wheelchairs and other people, getting access to that door, just take out that angle,
You could ground that a little.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm kind of going back to Valerie's comment
Yes.
about the band being on the stage. I feel that the altar should be our focus, and I feel like I agree with her point that the band is here to add to our worship and to lead our worship, but our focus should be on the altar and not on the band. And my other question would be, as it stands now, we have the pews over there, and I realize they're not used very much, but how would that space be used as it is in the drawing? What would it be used for?
Our intent is to make it more available for uses that would, for instance, use the whole stage, because we're still proposing to keep the ability to say, pull off the rail like we do now, say, at VBS, so that VBS would have a greater area to use. Other special music, we intend that we should be able to patch in our audio on both sides, so we'll have more flexibility in how we stage special music. Is that all parts of the question?
So thank you.
Dave?
Pastor and his helpers, are you going to use the front aisles or the front pews?
Or there's space up there to place the big holy throne chair thing that, some churches have, and I was really disappointed didn't happen here. But yeah. So.
We're not losing the front row. The picture may have been drawn based on an older plan from between the last time we maximized seating in here.
Yeah.
Just to clarify, the altar will still be as much higher than the band as it is now because it'll be on an extra step up. So even though the band is an extra step up, so is the altar. And yeah. And it does stay focused that way.
Yeah, I mean, in what I think Marion is trying to say, I think your perspective is, if you're worried about, the altar being the focus, it would be just as high, or, that much same distance above the band that it is now, because it goes 2 steps up, on the whole platform, whereas the band would be 1 step up. So you're talking altar at 3 steps. Anybody else would be down at 1. So, and some people certainly, I mean, our Lutheran heritage often even had the choir in the back in that loft, so you never see, anyone. Contemporary worship, there's certainly back and forth opinions on that. Some, I've seen it in Lutheran churches where it's even in the back. It's usually up front. We have it at the same level as the congregation. Some have it, multiple steps up. This proposes 1. And then how do you feel versus, is it helpful to see people who are helping lead you in worship or not? I guess we're falling onto the compromise of it's helpful to see them a little bit, but even as you then can still see, the altar and the cross very prominently in this design. So again, a compromise. What's the best compromise is, I guess, what we're discussing today. So,
I think to that, again, to the point of the primacy of the altar, while this project is largely concerned with what's going on the ground, we are continuing to talk about what we can do with, what's coming up to increase focus on the altar. So with these side pillars and the actual chancel area with the cross, we feel that there may be some options moving forward that we'll think about, and we don't have anything ready to necessarily propose at this time, but to set that apart as something special, so that again there's some visual cues that show the altar is what's significant to us.
In one of the drawings on that paper, it looks like there are additional lighting that comes down on the wall where the lights are right now. Are you adding additional lighting? It looked like they were on like pole lights.
I'm not sure that I know what part of the drawing you're referring to, but yes, we're absolutely looking at continuing to dial in our lighting. We've gone to LED. I think we have some balancing still to do to make sure that we're rendering color, evenly across. We want to look at how we can hopefully work with these sconces to reduce glare on the screens, how we can use light in the back to highlight the cross. These are the things that we're weighing, but we don't have a specific proposal on that front at this time.
So there aren't extra rods coming down
No.
with lights? Because that's what it looked like.
No, as Valerie said, we are not trying to make this look like a stage. So yeah, we're not. There's no plans of dropping things out of the ceiling. Everything would try to keep all the lighting things we've discussed is kind of keeping with what most people use as the sanctity of, how it looks now. There are no plans to drop a big hunk of lights, right? And I don't want to be under that heat anyway. You would see sweaty pastor each and every week, and it would not be pleasant. Yeah.
The idea is that we'll make the step wide enough that the flowers will stay in the same spot. And they'll actually be at the same height as they are now, because that's the mid-step.
I don't know if I came in a little late, so I don't know if this was considered, but as far as seeing the screens and all that, I've thought that just simple dark shades for the front too, depending on whether it's day or night. You can see right now that the one that's easiest to see is the one where the sun isn't shining in that side window. And at night, when we had like the Taizé the other night, the sun was down that way, then you couldn't see that one. I think just a couple dark shades that can...
Yeah, so one thing that we can do, is increase how dark those shades are. Yeah, you can go incrementally darker and darker and darker until you find the sweet spot. But again, I think the glare from the sconce is almost just as much of a detraction for the screens. So, and one thing that we are looking at is can we remove the screens now that we use them so much, and use a material on the back wall that will function as a screen but reduce the visual clutter of having a screen up there. So we'll have to look at how the light plays on that as well.
And right now the left side lamp is actually kind of waning a little bit, so that's why it's much better. One of the reasons it's actually quite a bit better on the right side. We need to replace the left side lamp soon. That's a no, we have not. I think it was more the idea we would keep the projectors so that when you're not using them, the clutter goes away entirely. They worked at the time, but then as we've looked at this design, we thought, we could probably just retexture that wall right there and put the right kind of paint on it, and you wouldn't even see them when they were not there. So at certain times, weddings, funerals, it might be, nice to have that. Well, that's a potential. Clive, you're the vice president in residence. Either way.
It depends whether there are any more questions. I think that everything has been pretty much covered and some good points were made. So I will call for somebody to make a motion that we proceed. We have a motion here. Can I get a second? Have a second? Thank you. So can I, by a show of hands, can I see who those are in favour? And a show of hands, those against? Then the motion is carried. Thank you.